like to formally apologize to the community. I am sorry if my actions hurt you or someone. Thank you. Is that? Are we good? Good night.
Three years ago, I made this video.
So last year I was reading this book called Midnight Sun. Yeah, that Midnight Sun, where he says weird things like this.
So here we are, 3 years later. Yay! And if you haven't seen part 1 yet, here's a quick recap. Now for the rest of you, let's get into the video.
Before we go any further, we need to stop and talk about the Quileute tribe. Although the tribe is portrayed in the fictional world of Twilight, the tribe itself is very real. What isn't real is the way in which they are portrayed in the saga, especially the tribe's history. And not only was their culture appropriated and misrepresented, but they were never consulted about the series either. And in the 17 years, nearly 2 decades since Twilight's release and the accumulation of over $3.4 billion worldwide, the Quileute tribe hasn't received compensation of any kind. In the description is a link for more information about the Quileute tribe and the mission to move to higher ground. The Quileute tribe lives in La Push, Washington, in a tsunami zone, which could wipe out the people and their culture. The mission behind Move to Higher Ground is to relocate and move to an area which is safer, protecting their people, culture, and practices. So check out the link in the description, and if you are able, consider donating. Also, be sure to share the link. Thanks, everyone.
So from where we left off, we've established that Pride and Prejudice inspired Twilight, Romeo and Juliet inspired New Moon, Wuthering Heights inspired Eclipse, and Jane Eyre seems to have inspired the entire series as a whole. But we haven't really talked about Breaking Dawn. Oh, Breaking Dawn. The Merchant of Venice. It's directly referenced in Breaking Dawn, and Stephenie Meyer has cited it as a point of inspiration within the final book. Though I would like to state for the record that Bella never references The Merchant of Venice as a favorite play of hers in Midnight Sun. I'm specifically talking about it because it is referenced directly in Breaking Dawn when Alice leaves Bella a note on a page torn from the play. But it is a play that is in Bella's possession, so at least it's part of her collection, and it's one she's read before. And while she doesn't directly reference this play in Midnight Sun, she does cite Shakespeare as a favorite author of hers. Okay, recap. The guy, Bassanio, wants to court a woman, Portia, but he doesn't have the funds, so he turns to his sugar daddy. The sugar daddy, wealthy friend, Antonio, is like, I don't have the kind of money you need, so let me get a loan from this guy, Shylock. Well, Shylock and Antonio's relationship is kind of complicated. There's a lot of stuff. It's kind of like Much Ado About Nothing in the sense that the characters all know each other and have relationships before the play is actually set. So I'm just doing the quick. So when it turns out that Antonio cannot pay back on the loan that he has taken from Shylock takes him to court, and then Portia, under the guise of the man, under the guise of a lawyer, because only men could be lawyers, she turns the tables, and she and Bassanio are able to marry, and Shylock looks like a fool, because Shylock is like, if you don't give me the money, then I get a pound of flesh, and Portia's like, you can have the pound of flesh, we don't care about that, but you can't draw blood. That's physically impossible, you guys. So, Shylock is the fool, I guess. Yeah, I hate this play. There's no other way to put it. I don't like this play. I think the show could be directed in a super interesting way, which allows the audience to feel for Shylock, but I have a difficult time reading this one. In fact, I had to read it for a class, and it was difficult to get through. Even if you haven't read The Merchant of Venice, there's a chance you're familiar with the criticisms against the play critiquing the work for being anti-Semitic. They'd be correct. There's no other way for me to look at it, and considering many of Shakespeare's other works have anti-Semitic lines sprinkled into them out of nowhere, truly, read Much Ado About Nothing. As much as I love Much Ado About Nothing, a character could literally be talking about the weather, and suddenly someone will say something hateful against Jews. Back to The Merchant of Venice. I give this play no stars. Can I do that? Okay, 1 star. Maybe. I don't know. I didn't like it. I don't appreciate the blatant hateful dialogue. I didn't appreciate what any of the characters had to offer as characters. Portia was kind of cool, maybe. If you thought Romeo and Juliet were a problematic couple, oh boy, these guys suck. I do, however, appreciate Portia and Nerissa dressing up like men. Twelfth Night is way more interesting about it, but Shakespearean gender expression is fun. I don't think Shylock was in the wrong. That loan wasn't paid back. Anyways, now you're probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with Breaking Dawn? And that, my friends, is an excellent question, because I was wondering the same exact thing. So, Breaking Dawn ends with the trial of sorts. At least that's how Stephanie Meyer describes it. Though it does not take place in a courtroom. So, Portia leads a literal trial in the play and is able to save Antonio and Bassanio, the man she loves. In Twilight, Alice discovers the key witness and evidence they need in their defense to save the woman she loves. So they're basically the same story. Anyways, both stories have trials, and I guess the Volturi would be Shylock in this scenario, but I hate that comparison. That doesn't really work. The Volturi is extremely weird. They're like, make this girl a vampire, and then he does, but because they have a child who they just assume is a forbidden child, everyone must die for a crime that wasn't committed. Whereas the loan wasn't paid back. Like, it wasn't paid. In The Merchant of Venice, Shylock gave Antonio the money, and Antonio didn't pay him back. Does the not spilling the blood thing make the whole arrangement ridiculous? Yes, it does. So yeah, there is a ridiculousness to both stories in a way. However, counter to that, in The Merchant of Venice, Shylock makes a deal and doesn't get what he was promised and is then forced to renounce his faith. That's not the same thing. The Volturi are spiteful against the Cullens and leave with nothing. But comparing the two makes me feel icky. I don't like the Volturi. I'm not a fan of Shylock either, but these two parties are not the same. Sure, you could argue Shylock had a feud with Antonio. You could argue for that in the same way that the Volturi had it out for the Cullens, but I don't feel comfortable comparing the two parties. Anyways, that's The Merchant and Breaking Dawn. And while we may not get anti-Semitism that The Merchant of Venice offers in Breaking Dawn, we do get xenophobia, guys. Winning. Reading this script was like reading a Dr. Seuss book. I have never been so conscious of rhyme schemes while reading Shakespeare before, but the words just jump off the page at me, and it was so comical and fun to read. But what does it have to do with Breaking Dawn? Well, it's just like The Merchant in that Stephanie Meyer has cited both as points of inspiration for Breaking Dawn. Midsummer is specifically used to talk about imprinting. So, first, I'm going to break down Midsummer's story, and then I'll circle back around to imprinting. Okay. A Midsummer Night's Dream follows a lot of characters. There's a random acting troupe, 4 young lovers, a fairy queen, and a donkey. Those are just a few, but at the core of the story, Puck, the donkey, uses magic to make characters fall in love with other people. For example, Lysander is in love with Hermia, who is marrying Demetrius. Hermia is in love with Lysander. Demetrius is in love with Hermia at least enough to marry her. He thinks she's really hot. Helena is Hermia's best friend, and she is in love with Demetrius. So Hermia has to marry a man she does not love, while Helena loves a man who is betrothed to Hermia. Okay, it's all foolish, right? Well, when magic gets involved, both Lysander and Demetrius fall in love with Helena, breaking Hermia's heart because these men claimed they were both in love with her initially. Lots of confusion ensues. When the magic is undone, Hermia and Lysander are reunited and marry. Demetrius falls in love with Helena and they're together. The end! At least for those characters. Okay, so now with that out of the way, let's talk about Breaking Dawn. Okay. Edward is in love with Bella. Bella is in love with Edward. Jacob is in love with Bella and feels extreme loyalty towards her. When Revelation is born, Jacob's love for Bella transfers over to her child. Ew. Okay, first I'm going to talk about imprinting as Stephanie Meyer describes it, because that will make more sense to the Midsummer parallel. Because Midsummer is dependent on magic, it follows this idea that ultimately love is something which cannot be controlled at all, which is also part of Meyer's world building of imprinting. So, here is an interview clip of Stephanie Meyer talking about the process of imprinting in the Twilight series, just so she can explain it for herself.
Imprinting is a bond that's formed between someone who's a werewolf and someone of the opposite sex. That bond is absolute, and the wolf in question cannot live if something happens to the other person. And he's also bound by that person's wishes. He's incapable of harming her, hurting her feelings. His only purpose at that point then becomes to keep that person safe and happy by whatever means possible. So with Jacob, once he imprints on Renesmee, his whole life is wrapped up in that little girl's safety and happiness.
So in the Twilight Saga Illustrated Guide, imprinting is described as a bonding incident between a werewolf when they become unconditionally tied to a human of the opposite sex. And when we're thinking of werewolves in the context of the Twilight universe, these aren't traditional werewolves that change with the phases of the moon. These are shapeshifters. So imprinting occurs only after a werewolf's first phasing. It can happen with anyone regardless of previous personal feelings. Imprinting happens the first time a werewolf sees the human object of his imprinting. If the werewolf does not react to a human the first time he sees her as he phases, he will never imprint on that human. So we see that with Jacob and Bella. If the werewolf does imprint, he is forever changed. From the second he sees the object of his imprinting, he will do anything to please and protect her. All other commitments in his life become secondary, even his commitment to the pack. So the language in the illustrated guide is very specific here because it says he will protect her. He will do anything to please her, because in the Twilight universe, werewolves are traditionally only men, which is why it's such a surprise when Leah transitions. It goes on to say that the relationship between the imprinting werewolf and the human imprinted upon is one of total acceptance and support on the werewolf's part. No matter the age or living conditions of the human, the werewolf automatically becomes whatever the human wants him to be, at the loss of his personal free will. If the human is young, the werewolf becomes the perfect platonic playmate and protector. As the human ages and changes, the werewolf instinctively switches roles to fulfill the human's needs. As it is described in the guide and as Jacob explains in the books, imprinting is something that cannot be controlled. This is evidenced by Sam leaving his girlfriend Leah after imprinting on Emily, who he has a romantic relationship with. Imprinting is horrible. It completely strips a person of their free will and bonds them to another individual for eternity, which means Jacob is bound to Rasputin for the rest of his life because she is immortal. Jake is also technically immortal as long as he continues to shift, so until the day he decides to stop shifting, he will continue to not age. And because he's bound to regurgitation, he's not going to age because he cannot allow anything bad to happen to her. So this is a terrible situation for him. This section of the video may be upsetting. Please follow the time codes to skip to the next section. Thanks everyone. And while I do want to acknowledge that these are fictional characters, I think that's why they're worth critiquing even more, because they represent real-world constructs and ideologies. So by talking about them, it allows us to address real-world issues without having to involve real-world victims and people. And this way, I'm not placing victimhood on real living individuals who do not see themselves as victims. Imprinting has been a long-time controversial issue regarding the Twilight series, and it has been critiqued as a form of grooming, our main example of this being Jacob. When Jacob imprints on Relativity, she is a newborn baby. Meanwhile, he is 16 years old. And this is not the first time the issue of age comes up in the Twilight series, with Bella and Edward being a prime example, since he has lived for 103 years by the time they meet, and has been a vampire for almost 87 years. That is really old. However, Edward maintains this 17-year-old brain, and he does not physically or mentally mature past that. Bella is 18 when she is turned, and only 18. She cannot mature past this. In fact, her 19th birthday was only a couple of days after she was turned, so she is forever 18. But while Edward has had at least 86 years of experiences, multiple degrees, and has seen a lot of the world, Bella has been to California, Washington, Arizona, and Florida. That's it. She's been in high school. She's really smart and she loves science, but in comparison to Edward, she lacks experience, and that's where the critique comes from. In the case of Relation and Jacob, this is a newborn and a teenager who is now locked to her forever. And when she comes of age, which, because of the way she ages, she will come of age at 7 years old. So while she'll have only been on Earth for 7 years, she will be mentally and physically about 17, 18, which is when she will stop aging. But during those 7 years, Jacob, by design, will be her number one companion and look after her. The biggest indication that their relationship will become romantic is that Stephenie Meyer herself compares Breaking Dawn to A Midsummer Night's Dream. So you know what, let's do it. Let's see what Breaking Dawn would look like in the world of Shakespeare. Puck sees Jacob asleep on the couch, uses a love potion, and when Jacob doth awakes, he sees Rosalie holding a baby, and the potion bindeth Jacobeth to the childeth forevereth. And humor ensues. No, that's gross. That's gross. That's gross. That's very gross. That's gross. That's what that is. That is very gross. That's gross. It's gross. The magic system of imprinting itself is reminiscent of Puck's manipulation in Midsummer because Puck takes away the autonomy of the characters by controlling how it is that they fall in love and leaves who they fall in love with to chance. However, Midsummer is supposed to be humorous and satirical. Breaking Dawn and the entirety of Twilight is as serious as it can be in a world of vampires that sparkle. But when it comes to imprinting, it takes itself very seriously. Those bonds are everlasting, literally everlasting in the case of Revelation and Jacob, because Riptide will live forever. Even the guide tries to make it seem as though the person who has been imprinted on has some kind of power over the werewolf because of the way that the bond takes away the werewolf's autonomy. But that does not negate the fact that a relationship, no matter the context, is being pushed upon another person. Imprinting in psychobiology is described as a form of learning in which a very young animal fixes its attention on the first object with which it has visual, auditory, or tactile experience, and thereafter follows that object. It, however, says nothing about how the object of said affection feels. So here we have love bombing, obsession, and because retaliation is a newborn baby, grooming. Grooming is an extremely heavy accusation to throw around, and while we are talking about fictional characters here, I do think it is important to consider the fictional and even real-life implications of this kind of relationship, especially any attempts that are made to normalize it, even if a development like this seems appropriate to the world building. A really important piece of context while reading the Twilight saga is that Stephenie Meyer is a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormonism. Mormonism has very specific rules and guidelines by which they follow in how they view marriage, romantic relationships, and how you should go about living your life. Before I continue, I want to state for the record that I've grown up around Mormon communities, and I have seen a lot of this firsthand from friends, from neighbors. Meanwhile, I've been an atheist since birth. And compared to a lot of other religious faiths, there are a lot of issues I take with the structure of Mormonism, and it has even impacted my own life personally. So while I don't want to dog on the Mormon faith or offend anyone's beliefs, I do think it is important to talk about and acknowledge the more problematic and questionable aspects of the Mormon Church. And if you would like to skip this portion of the video, again, please follow the time codes. Thank you so much for understanding. Now, to make sure I wasn't putting words in anyone's mouth, I decided to go straight to the source and look at a website for the Church of Latter-day Saints, which lays out some of what I'll refer to as laws, which the church will encourage and Mormons usually follow. Marriage in the eyes of the Church of Latter-day Saints is sacrament. It is viewed as a pledge, and it is instituted and sanctified by the Lord himself. In a quote from Genesis, it says, "And the Lord God said, It is not good that the man should be alone. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." In the Church of Latter-day Saints, marriage is viewed as an institution. It is a right. It is something which is necessary in fulfilling life happiness and fulfilling God's purpose on earth. Well, that's disturbing and all, but what does any of that have to do with the Twilight Saga, let alone imprinting? Well, it might actually tell us a lot about the future of these characters. As part of my evidence, I submit the quote from Breaking Dawn in which Edward literally refers to Jacob as his son.
So should I start calling you Dad? No.
His son? Oh, yes. Yes, he refers to him as his son. Bella also gets extremely upset when she discovers that Jacob has imprinted on Renaissance because she knows what it implies. And Jacob tries to deny it, but babes, at a certain point, this relationship does go romantic. Edward also wouldn't refer to Jacob as his son, something he does at the end of the book. He does it towards the end of the book. It's definitely romantic. That's grooming. The Church of Latter-day Saints literally says that man has certain basic needs, which include moral, social, biological, and spiritual needs. And these needs can only be fully realized in the God-ordained institution of eternal marriage. To live the abundant life here and eternal life hereafter, man must love and be loved, serve and sacrifice, have responsibility, and exercise his God-given creative powers. Which means that the only way for Ritalin and Jacob to live fulfilled lives in eternity is to get married. Icky! This is also why we have the whole waiting for marriage thing between Edward and Bella. Now for this portion of the video, I will be referring to Renesmee by her government name just for the sake of care towards the victim in this case, though it is fictional. Now there are a few different forms that grooming can take, so I'll be referring to just some of the forms RAINN refers to, and this will be linked in the description below. RAINN is a fantastic organization in understanding sexual violence and a really great resource if you need help. So again, they will be linked in the description down below. As RAINN points out, though grooming takes on many different forms, it often follows similar patterns. So one of these is through gaining access and isolating the victim, and RAINN defines this as when abusers attempt to physically or emotionally separate a victim from those protecting them, and often seek out positions in which they have contact with minors. And we can easily see that kind of relationship between Renesmee and Jacob. He instantly takes on a guardianship role with her, protecting her from anyone and everyone, even if it means isolating her from people that care about her, like Bella, because he can't trust that she is a newborn, will be safe around her own daughter. This is a form of isolation. Another thing to consider is trust development and keeping secrets. Abusers attempt to gain trust of a potential victim through gifts, through attention. They share secrets and other means that make them feel as though they have this caring relationship, and they're training them to keep the relationship itself a secret because they have this bond. They have things that only the two of them share, and they're giving all of this attention and devotion. They're saying, you can trust me. Jacob gives Renesmee the bracelet, for example. There's also desensitization to touch and the discussion of sexual topics. While the discussion of sexual topics does not happen within the books, there is a sense of physicality between the two of them. And of course, In all of this, there is the attempt by the abuser to make this behavior seem natural and normal, especially as a way to avoid raising suspicions around this relationship. So when you have this normalization of the relationship through something like the world building of imprinting, it's an attempt to normalize it within this universe and to excuse the behavior of this character, especially by saying, well, it's something he simply cannot control. It's just this urge he feels, and it's so linked to his inner being and his genetic code, and he can't turn on that. Even though this is a fictional story and a fantasy, it does bring about real world implications, and it is gross. And I think it's important to think critically about the world building that is happening within this story, especially when we start comparing it to the comedy of Shakespeare. Unlike some of the other books on Bella's list, Fahrenheit 451 stands out among the rest. Bella lists lots of classics, she lists lots of fantasy, she also cites some science fiction novels and authors as some of her favorite works, but Fahrenheit 451 is the only dystopian novel she cites in Midnight Sun. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury is set in a futuristic town where books have been completely outlawed and burned. The Fahrenheit 451 refers to the temperature at which books burn, hence the happenings of the... Anyway, the story follows Guy Montag, a man whose job is to burn books and the buildings where those books were found to be. The novel was published in 1953 and has been used for decades as a reference point for discussions around censorship and book banning. Though it is set in a fictional world, book banning is often used as a tactic by far right-wing political parties like the Nazi Party in the 1930s and 40s. In relation to Bella and the Twilight universe, I think it's rather ironic that this is one of Bella's favorite books, since Twilight is a challenged book itself. In 2009, it was one of the most challenged books in the US, hitting number 5 on the list right after The Perks of Being a Wallflower and To Kill a Mockingbird, which is another one of Bella's favorites. Ironically, Fahrenheit 451 is also a challenged book, which may have been an intentional reference on Meyer's part in response to Twilight's multiple censorship attempts. And just to add a little footnote here, challenging a book refers to the attempt made by an individual or a party to remove or restrict the chosen material. Banning refers to the actual removal of said material. For example, Susan can approach a school board and challenge the access students have to Twilight. From there, Twilight will be pulled for review. This review of the material can take as long as the board needs it to, and during that time, the book usually is not available to students until it is returned to the shelf. So even if a book is challenged and under review, this can still restrict access to the material for days, weeks, months, years, even if it is temporary. If a book is removed entirely, that is a ban. But there's a lot of gray area there. This isn't the only book on Bella's list which has been challenged, but it is one of the only dystopian novels she mentions. I didn't find any parallels between her own story and Fahrenheit, but I did enjoy the book and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I found the pacing to be a bit dragged at times, but I otherwise enjoyed it, and I was happy to finally have an excuse to sit down and actually read a book that's been on my mental TBR list for several years. Even if you're familiar with the book's contents like I was, I still think it's worth reading, and it's also under 300 pages and takes about 3 or 4 hours to read, which is a lot less daunting than some other classic literature. Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton is one of the books that Bella mentions, and this was one I'd never heard of before, but was kind of intrigued because it's fantasy, and though I read fantasy, I read varying degrees of fantasy. One of my favorite fantasy books is Six of Crows. I recently read V.E. Schwab's A Darker Shade of Magic, and I'm now on the second book. I really like that universe. I think it's cool. I grew up reading the Wizard books and Twilight, so I like fantasy, but there's usually a level of reality within them. This book is entirely dragons, so it was a big step out of my comfort zone for me. I liked the dynamics of the dragons and the Regency style of the book itself. It felt very Regency, very Jane Austen inspired. I do have a lot of questions regarding the logistics of this world, like why are they traveling in trains? And why are they doing human things as... Anyways, the couples are very Jane Austen coded, as I said, and they seem to be paired well. There were a lot of characters, so I
didn't really bother trying to keep track. I just trusted that the story would remind me as I went, and that it would tell me who was who as I went, and that seemed to work well enough, even though I did get confused a few times as to who was who, because some of the names were kind of similar, but then the book reminded me, and I was like, I'm good. I'm good. Everybody was a dragon. I haven't really read many dragon books except this book when I was a kid. I read it as a kid. So maybe this was nostalgic. I don't know. I don't remember that series at all. But I read it. So, yep. Mansfield Park has got to be my least favorite Jane Austen book. If you haven't seen my video on Jane Austen's novels, I'm going to talk about Lady Susan soon after I read it, because that wasn't in that video because I was talking about the main six. Anyways, I don't like this book. Oh my god, I always wondered what people meant when they said that they didn't really like Bella as a character, because I'm like, come on, Bella's so funny and chaotic. You gotta love that. And now I feel like I understand, because there were some characteristics of Fanny that I was like, no, girl, no, we're not gonna do that. We're getting mad at the women when we should be getting mad at the men. It's Cinderella's story, kind of. Yeah, Mansfield Park is what if Jane Austen wrote a Cinderella story. It's not my favorite Jane Austen novel. Her similarities to Bella is that she is a lone wolf kind of character. You know, if you watch the Twilight film, you have the whole scene where she's like, purple's cool. You know, that to me gives Fanny energy of Fanny coming to live with her cousins and being like, yeah, this is cool, this is whatever. I feel so awkward and uncomfortable here and no one likes me, you know? So it's like if you had to deal with Forks High School for an entire book. Bella's supposed friends, with the exception of Angela, with some exceptions in the books, they're very annoying. I'm not a Mike fan. We're not a fan of Mike here. We're not even a fan of Tyler here. They're teenagers, okay? I'm allowed to find teenage boys annoying. Those are my Mansfield thoughts. Sense and Sensibility wasn't Jane Austen's first novel, but was her first published novel, and it feels like a first draft. Sense and Sensibility is by no means a bad book, but because it has so many similarities to Pride and Prejudice just feels like the better, cleaned, revised version of Sense and Sensibility. So if we're gonna be playing that comparison game, you know, also there's a whole Edward namesake. Yeah, Jane Eyre had that as well. Bella actually reads Sense and Sensibility in Twilight, not just, Midnight Sun, but she's reading it in Twilight, and she comes across Edward's name. She's like, we cannot have this right now. This is a bad omen. I need to get this kid out of my mind. Again, 17-year-old jerk, okay? No. Boo! Not an Edward fan. So there you go. Also, Edward in the book made me mad. Again, I talk about this more in my Jane Austen video. Guys, I'm sorry. I'm gonna say it. Edward Ferrars annoys me. Why? He's also one of Jane Austen's more realistic men, in the sense that, he screws up majorly. I mean, just look at the whole Sabrina Taste Shawn Mendes situation. That has Sense and Sensibility written all over it. Persuasion's a fine book. It's not my favorite Jane Austen. I really like Anne Elliot. I think her and Bella have a lot of commonalities in the sense that they're very introverted, very quiet, and also a major characteristic is that Anne Elliot does not pick up on the fact that the man she loves is in love with her and reciprocates her feelings. Bella is the same exact way. This girl, she spends 4 books being like, yeah, but does he actually care about me? And it doesn't help that in New Moon, Edward's like, I don't love you, I never loved you, and then leaves her in hopes that she'll just move on, which shows he does not understand Bella or the teenage girl's psyche at all.
You said...
I lied. I had to lie. You believe me so easily.
Okay, dude. Bella, Anne, I get it. I see it. Anne, you're so cool. Okay, next book. Northanger Abbey, my favorite Jane Austen novel. Jane Austen, gothic genre, so great. I had so much fun not only reading and enjoying this book, but it was also a lot of fun to think about the parallels that exist between the world of Northanger Abbey and Twilight, because both
sort of play with the gothic genre. And because Twilight is an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, you also have this playful relationship with Regency sensibilities. The main comparisons that exist between Catherine and Bella are how young the protagonists are. They're also incredibly curious, they're prone to jump to conclusions, and they love exploring, they love researching. They're very curious people with lots of questions about the men in their life. But despite these similarities, where Catherine's monsters are revealed to be fictional, Bella's monsters are incredibly real. Before I go, I wanted to first of all thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful week and stay safe. Don't let the vampires bite.